Hello again, and today I want to. This is story time, a story about angels in Mexico. And many years ago, this goes back to 1983, when my significant other, Jim, and I had gotten ready to spend a month in Mexico. We had packed our stuff away, and then my ex-husband called and said, "It's time for you to resume your maternal duties." I had wanted my son back after giving him to his father at the age of 6, and his father had steadfastly held on to him, so I only got to see him on weekends and holidays. And so here his father was basically admitting that he had not turned our son Stefan into a chip off the old block, and he was not satisfied. So Stefan was coming back into my life, and I was happy about that. But we were just about to take off for Mexico, and it was going to be kind of an awkward situation since Jim and I would be toting a 16-foot travel trailer behind us, and that was going to be our accommodations for the month while we were in Mexico. So here comes Stefan, and Stefan was always a really sweet, wonderful, mostly happy-go-lucky, and very, very funny young man. And Jim, unfortunately, he just didn't like kids. He didn't like his own kids, he didn't like my kid. And so we started going to Mexico, and it was pretty obvious that Jim did not like Stefan, and he made Stefan's life difficult. And so we had arrived at this lovely, it was like a vacation spot, a travel trailer stop, Agua Dulce in Mexico, and it was lovely. I mean, there were a lot of children who were there for the summer, and they looked happy. They were playing, they were splashing, and Stefan was really glum looking. And so I said, "Would you rather spend the next 4 weeks here rather than the rest of that trip with Jim and me?" And Stefan said, "You bet." And so I did leave Stefan at that summer camp while Jim and I continued our travels in Mexico. And within a week, I was so sick. I had gotten Montezuma's revenge, and I had gotten it good. I remember being at the ruins in Palenque and hesitant to even start up the steps because I knew I'd have to go find a bathroom as soon as I started up the steps. So it wasn't much fun, and it didn't get much better despite the Mexican pharmacy giving me some wonderful drugs. And the Mexican people themselves, they were lovely. They were really lovely. But I was so sick, I was not really enjoying myself. And then we went down to Cancun, and Jim was almost taken out by the tide when he went into the ocean, which might not have been such a bad thing looking back now. But anyway, we ended up in a place called Chetumal, which is at the very tail end of Mexico. It's right next to Belize. And Jim set up the travel trailer, and then he and the Cadillac disappeared. He and the money. I mean, I was left with, I think we had 10 or 15 Krugerrands 1-ounce gold coins. So I was not totally destitute, but I didn't speak Spanish. I don't know what I would have done. Anyway, Jim disappeared, and it was about 4 days before I had to pick Stefan up. I had told him I would be back on his birthday, and I try to keep my promises to whomever, but especially to children. And even though Stefan was going to be 15 then, I really needed to be able to get back to him on his special day. And Jim was gone. Jim stayed gone for days. And I was there, sick as a dog, with 100-degree temperature and not stirring from this little trailer, wondering what the heck I was going to do. Well, Jim reappeared the day before I had to get Stefan. He came back early in the morning, and boy, he was drunk as a skunk. And I started to talk to him about picking up Stefan, and he said, "He ain't my kid. Get him yourself." And I said, "Well, can I take the car?" And he said, "No." And for me to take 3 planes as sick as I was, not speaking the language, I couldn't quite see that. Anyway, I knew better than to argue with Jim when he was drunk. And so I just went back to reading my magazine, and Jim went to take a shower. And as soon as he left, I grabbed his car keys and his registration, and I left. I didn't take anything else. I didn't take a change of clothing. I didn't take a toothbrush. I didn't take my pocketbook, and I left. And so I had about 500 and some odd miles of really horrible roads to drive through. And along the way, I encountered some Mexican military. They had a roadblock on this 2-lane, 1 lane in each direction, set up in the middle of absolutely nowhere with jungle on either side of us, roadblock. And I rolled down the car window, and the guy said, "I Coca." And I'm thinking, they couldn't be asking me about Coca-Cola, could they? I said, no, which means I don't have. I have no Coca-Cola. I have no cocaine. I don't know what you guys are asking for. I mean, I was so sick. And the fact that I'd had this high temperature for days had left these horrible blisters all over my lips. I looked awful. I'm sure I smelled awful. I looked awful, and I felt terrible. And they just couldn't get me to talk to them because I couldn't speak their language, and I didn't have whatever they needed or wanted, and they could look in the car. I mean, I had nothing in there but me, and so finally they got tired of me, and they said go, So I continued, and I had my brain was so disease-addled from this fever that I thought nobody in Mexico is going to speak English. I had only these 2 gold coins I had taken with me, and I had about $25, $30 for a tank of gas or something. I mean, I didn't have much cash on me. Maybe for 2 tanks of gas, which I would need to get there. Anyway, I ended up trying to make it to Villahermosa, where this guard at the Tolmic Head Park, I knew he spoke English, and I really, really wanted to get there before 5 because I had convinced myself if I could just get back to him. We had met him on the way down, and he had wanted to interest us in some archaeological digs. So I had his card, and so I went and drove around Villahermosa and found the hotel that he said he lived in. And when I asked for him, they said no. And maybe because I looked so horrible, they were protecting him from me. I don't know. But so I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to cash these gold coins in order to be able to pay for my son's stay at this children's camp. I was just, I was so, what was the word there? Depleted for sure. But I just didn't know what to do. I felt completely helpless. And so I thought, okay, let me go find what you really, really need. You really need to sleep, and you need to get into some warm water and clean yourself. And so I was driving around the outskirts of Villahermosa, and I came upon, it was just lovely, the street kind of curving around, going around the bends, and, all these palm trees and bougainvilleas, and it was beautiful. And then there's a sign, a little sign that says hotel with an arrow pointing off to a little side street. So I thought, okay, I didn't see a hotel. So I took that little side street and it wound around, and I came to this really very nice hacienda looking hotel, whitewashed with colonnades. It was a very pleasant looking place. So I decided to go in, and I rented myself a room for the night. And then I still had enough cash left to buy a toothbrush and some toothpaste. And I figured, surely, in the morning I'll feel better, and I'll go look for a coin shop where I can exchange those coins that I had, or at least one of them. They were worth close to $400 at the time, 400 American dollars. And so I was in the gift shop, and the young lady in the gift shop spoke English. And so I thought, I'm saved, I can ask her. So I said, do you know where in Villahermosa I can find a coin shop to exchange gold coins for pesos? And she said, "Oh, ma'am, I've never heard of such a place in Villahermosa." And so now I'm crestfallen. And then just then the owner of the shop walks in, and the young lady asks the owner in perfect, flawless English, "This lady is asking about coin shops in Villahermosa. Do you know of any such things?" And the woman, the owner, said, "Oh, I don't. I know exactly what you're talking about, though, because my husband and I, we frequently go to Texas, and we've been in such places." So I said, oh my God, I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to get some gold exchanged for pesos so I can go and pick up my son at a summer camp tomorrow." And she said, "Well, if you'll give me a couple of minutes to close up here, I could call and ask my brother or my father. They both like collecting gold coins and they might be interested." And I said, "Oh, please do that for me. I would really appreciate it." And so she finished, and then she called, and she was talking in Spanish, so I didn't know what she was saying. And she said, "My brother would be interested in seeing your gold coins, if you would follow me." And so I got back in my car, and I'm following her through Villahermosa. And it turned out that her brother owned the Chevrolet dealership, and of course a Cadillac is nothing but a big Chevy. So very, very impressive. And I'm sitting in this little office in his dealership. He looks at me. He says, "What brings you to this part of Mexico?" And I said, "Well, I have a son. He's up at a summer camp in Agua Dulce, and I am on my way to try and pick him up again." And the man says to me, "Oh, you're talking about Stefan, aren't you?" And I thought, okay, the soldiers way back probably did me. They probably killed me and threw my body into the bushes, and I haven't realized that I'm dead yet, because how is this Mexican stranger in the middle of Villahermosa in this Chevrolet dealership telling me he knows my son? And I must have looked so shocked when he did this. He said, "I too have a son, and my son is also at that camp. And I visited him over the weekend, and I got to meet your Stefan." And I thought, okay, this is too unlikely. But yes, I was so grateful. He wanted both of the gold coins. I sold him only one. He was kind of disappointed. But I sold him the one gold coin, and then I went back to the hotel, and I had the first decent sleep I'd had since leaving Stefan in this camp. And so the following morning I had the money, and I got to Stefan's camp, and the other kids there went and got him for me. He comes bouncing down the trail, and he gets to a halt. He looks at me, he says, "Ma," he said, "what happened? You look so unusual." I mean, Stefan was always really thoughtful and heartfelt, and he just couldn't bring out the words as to how horrible and wretched I actually looked. And he looked as bad. I mean, he was the only gringo in camp, and the mosquitoes, they had a feast on him. He had scabs up and down his body, his arms, every. And then the boys in the camp had been expected to wash and dry their own clothing. So washing, they would have a tub or something, and they would stick it in water, and then they would fling these completely wet clothes onto the soil to bake dry. Well, all of Stefan's clothes looked completely gray. They had absorbed the soil. And so he looked wretched, his clothing looked wretched, but oh my God, I was so happy to see him. And now, of course, I grabbed hold of him. And he and I went back down to that same hotel to spend the entire day there and the night. And he told me about his time at the camp, and he had tortillas in so many different ways, tortilla soup. I mean, he just laid out 20 different ways that they had tortillas, but they had them every day. And I thought, well, he probably won't want any tortillas for a really long time to come. And I had to buy him all new clothes, because what he had was, it couldn't be saved. It just couldn't be saved. And it was his birthday, and he always loved steaks. So he had a filet mignon on that day. And in the evening, I said, well, I've told you what happened with Jim. What do you think we should do? And he said, why don't we just leave the bum in Chetumal and you and I go back to the States? And I thought, well, he would actually deserve that kind of a fate, but I figured, okay, why don't we give back his car and then you and I can fly out. But when we got back to Chetumal to the camp the next day, Jim was a changed man. He had been sober all 3 days, and he had not figured out what the heck had happened to me or his car. And so he came out of the trailer, dropped to his knees, tears flowing from his face. I am so sorry, I'm so sorry. And he was just a very sweet, nice guy for the rest of our trip through Mexico. But looking back at this, I thought, what are the likely odds that I find this hotel, which I can't see, and it comes with this guest shop with a perfectly English-speaking lady who knows exactly what I need, who happens to have a brother, who happens to have a son, who happens to be at the same camp, right? I mean, I thought the chance of those things having happened accidentally it's just impossible that this happened accidentally. And so I realized that I had been given guidance, and I never have seen angelic forces. I've never heard them. I've had no auditory experiences of them. But I realized for sure someone up there loved me a whole lot and loved Stefan as well. And that's my story about angels over Mexico, and it is in, I think, chapter 22 of my book. Lots of other stories. Hope you enjoyed this one. It's one of the crazier ones in this book. So have a good rest of the weekend, and try not to spend too much time with your head in politics. I'm trying to do that as well. All right, guys. Ciao.